those discussions have begun in the boardroom. Everybody wants to do something to do with AI. Those teams are having no success. McKinsey interviewed something like 300 business leaders. They asked, what kind of success are you having with generative AI? And they found that 90% of all of the activities in the generative AI space are essentially pilots that don't really go anywhere. So 10% of activity goes to production. Rand did a very similar study. They found 80% doesn't make it to production. MIT found that 95% of all generative AI pilots either have failed or are not in production.
They have not generating any kind of return on investment.
Is the skill gap not necessarily in building, is the skill gap in monitoring? How does it drift? How does it behave? Has the model been refreshed in the meantime? Is it still giving me the same results? Are my tests still accurate? Because it's very difficult nowadays to have tests with fail or pass. You have to test for the outcome.
Look at your budget, because either you have a restricted budget, which a lot of people do, reduce your scope and do it right instead of too much, just take a narrow scope, but do it well.
What I was keen to speak to you guys about is, as everyone will well be aware of, the world has been set on fire with LLM mania.
The hype, the big hype.
Yeah. Understandably, in many cases, because LLMs are incredibly useful for many things, as we've found out over the years. Solved a lot of problems that we had in the NLU days. Don't solve all problems all of the time. So the debate really is about, where do LLMs and generative AI fit? Where does NLU fit? Is LLMs and is generative AI completely disrupting and has completely obliterated the need for NLU? Does NLU still have its place? What are they both good at and bad at? And how can an enterprise that's looking at this, thinking about their conversational AI strategy, put together a decent plan that uses the right tool for the job, basically, was the job of trying to get you guys together and have that discussion.
All right.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Good.
All right. So maybe we should start then with some of the, do you want to call it hype? Is it hype? It probably is hype in terms of LLMs are the answer to all of our prayers. That seems to be the rhetoric that is out there at the moment, but it doesn't necessarily seem as though, if you look at a lot of the big enterprises, the reality of what's in production isn't necessarily following the hype of what you would read.
I think we need to be very clear about the hype. Is the hype about actual business outcomes that we're seeing, or is the hype about the potential that it could have?
Yeah.
So I think at this point in time, the hype is more about the business potential and what business leaders have been promised that is going to have as an outcome.
Yeah.
Have they really been promised it? Or have they read it and they made their mind about it? Because one of the very interesting things about this technology, it's one of the first technology that moved back to the boardroom.
Yeah.
Where the decision has been made in the boardroom to adopt it. And it's not the technical team, it's not the why should we take this technology, it comes from the top. And I think that's one of the problems of that technology. Everybody is playing with ChatGPT and everybody has an opinion and they're saying, how hard can it be? And the business are becoming, I don't know, product leader or something like that. And yeah, the reality on the ground is very, very, very different. I mean, I remember in the early days of it, like 2 years ago, technology team telling us at the time, we don't know what to do with that technology. We can't make it work, but we have been asked. And it's just like, that's the first warning sign. Doesn't take anything away from the technology.
But that it kind of could be perceived as a good thing, that, because if your chief executive is knocking on your door and you're part of the AI team and your chief executive is knocking on your door saying, you've got a license to do more, in principle, that sounds like a good discussion to have. I suppose the disconnect is the expectation that is wrapped around it.
But as you said, it was meant to be a discussion, not an expectation. And I think it was an expectation for a lot, And it's very, very similar to a little bit big data in maybe 10 years ago or something like that. Everybody was talking about it. It went a little bit in the boardroom as well, to some degree, but at least people didn't understand it at the board levels. You know what I mean? So that limited a little bit the expectations and so on. I think here, the problem is everybody has played with ChatGPT and they think, it answers all my questions. Nobody's, at the board level ever checked the fact that comes out of these systems, which sometimes is questionable. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. The reality of where those discussions have begun in the boardroom, everybody wants to do something to do with AI. It then trickles down to the teams that are designing and building those solutions. Those teams are having, I was going to say mixed success. I would probably actually revise that to say no success if you look at the data that is out at the minute. So three separate studies, I say studies, McKinsey's wasn't necessarily a study, but McKinsey, first part of this year, interviewed something like 300 business leaders. They asked, what kind of success are you having with generative AI? And they found that 90% of all of the activities that are going on in the generative AI space are essentially pilots that don't really go anywhere. So 10% of activity goes to production. RAND, a research institution in America, did a very similar study. They found 80% of activity doesn't make it to production. And recently, this week or a few weeks ago, there was a study from MIT that found that 95% of all generative AI pilots have not yet either have failed or are not in production. It's a bit difficult to, you've got to read in between the lines a little bit there. I don't know if they're saying necessarily that it's completely failed or whether they're saying it hasn't got to production.
I think it was very much around they have not generating any kind of relevant return on investment.
Yeah. So,
which doesn't mean they are failing.
Yeah.
It means it's not generating what the board is probably expecting from it.
So be that as it may then, one company finds that 80% is going nowhere, one finds that 90%, another one finds 95%. What is going on?
Depends on definition of success, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And how they're measuring that. I know there's some pioneers in the field, especially in conversational AI, that are prone to piloting these new technologies, that we've always seen them as the first movers. And I remember we were having a conversation with them about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and they were starting on this Gen AI journey. And now the conversation has completely shifted to exactly what you were saying. Okay, we were given all this budget to do this, and now we have to start proving that ROI. And it's very difficult because we are still in testing stage. We are still not fully rolled out. We are still trying. We're still trying to monitor. We still have challenges. But at the same time, it's been 2 years and now we have to prove ROI.
What then? So there's probably be a lot of people tuning in or who have come across, you open LinkedIn and probably
don't
go there. But the thing is, this is where people get their information from. So you open something like LinkedIn or whatever, and you can't really scroll past 10 posts without, I don't know if your feeds are the same as mine, but I can't scroll past 10 posts without somebody talking about this marketing pipeline that they've completely automated with AI, and this sales pipeline is completely automated with AI, and this customer service pipeline is completely automated with AI, and I'm a one person, heading towards being a unicorn and all that kind of stuff. So, and even when you talk to some of the AI vendors that are more mid-market kind of operators, they have some quite decent stories of where generative AI, end-to-end Gen AI applications have been put in production, doing reasonably well. So I suppose that's where people are getting their information from, is it seems as though there's a load of activity going on and everyone's doing it. But then you reference that company there, large enterprise in the UK, who it's not as simple as that. There's a lot more stuff involved in getting generative AI to production in a big organization. So maybe we could try and just bridge the gap there between what's the difference between all of these things that we see and hear of Gen AI agents revolutionizing business and making that stuff work in a large enterprise? What are some of the factors that the large enterprises have to contend with that the mid-market and below don't?
I mean, if you take, you talk about sales and marketing and all these posts we all have seen. Interestingly enough, the MIT paper this week talk about the fact that those are the biggest failure. And most of the benefit they have seen in the successful rollout are more back office automations, things like that. So that's for the first point. For the second point, in terms of enterprise versus mid-market, I think mid-market have a lot less compliance. We have all seen the compliance issue in enterprise to go through. Probably they have more creative license in marketing that big company can get away with. I would be interested to see if the subject are a bit more narrow or narrower. Yes, we said, which help getting it right, and also probably the fact that they can maybe get away with less being less responsible or being less careful about their brand positioning. You take a large enterprise. We have all seen it, the TPD. I'm not even going to name the other one. It's a disaster. A mid-market have very little risk of that coming out.
Yeah. You've got a lot regarding data as well here, haven't you? I know that, you can access these models in a lot safer way now in terms of where your data is going and stuff like that. But if you think about a large bank, millions of customers, hundreds of thousands of interactions with their assistant, taking data out of a core banking system, putting it into a conversational interaction, that type of data isn't something that you can play with irresponsibly. So you've got to be absolutely certain that your data pipeline and everything that touches your data is absolutely safe, compliant, all of that kind of stuff has to be in play. And that sounds like a bit of bureaucratic kind of like red tape to get around, which it is if you work in one of those organizations. You've got to kind of, most of the time that you spend is not building the thing, it's actually getting approval to use the data or whatever it might be. But still, that's just the way that businesses are functioning when you're dealing with such critical data and infrastructure, isn't it?
I think there's a few reasons why the rollout is slower with LLMs. So business leaders and other businesses, when they see a demo from a vendor, it looks great. But don't forget, it's a control demo. Yeah, so they already have certain guardrails in place when they show you. And then, it looks great. It is great. You can build fast, it's true. But for example, it might take 6 weeks to build a retail bot, but then you might take 4 months before you actually release it. And there's a few reasons why. One is compliance. Yeah, so you build it. Now, what do? We have certain policies in place. We have to check that the model is not drifting. We have to check that today it's for a specific answer. I have 7 steps in this policy that I have to tell my client. Tomorrow, do I still have 7 steps? So you have to check for that continuously. You're going to have governance. You're going to have legal coming in to make sure that everything's all right. In the old days, with the NLU, you had control over the answer. So everyone could see that out of 210s with 700 answers, those are the answers. Today, you don't have that certainty anymore. So they will have to check that the output is still the same every time, possibly, or it follows the guidelines. Also, another big reason that I think people are quite forgetting about is the skill gap. And is the skill gap not necessarily in building, is the skill gap in monitoring throughout. How does it drift? How does it behave? Does it go against our guidelines? Is it still keeping the tone? Has the model been refreshed in the meantime? Is it still giving me the same results? Are my tests still accurate? Because it's very difficult nowadays to have tests with fail or pass. You have to test for the outcome. Am I reaching that objective for that client rather than, yes, it said this, or it didn't say that.
Yeah.
So that's why the rollout is a lot slower than we expected. So maybe in the definition of, 95% of them don't succeed is maybe because I had a timeline of 3 months and actually it's taking me 6 months. So my ROI will be proven a lot later. So that's a fail to me.
But it's interesting you talk about skill gap, because that's what came out in one of the study, the skill gap of, the technology itself. It's a very complex technology, very new. There's still no real framework of best practices. And what you see large enterprise, to go back to your question, large enterprise and small and medium business. Large enterprise with the data privacy, with the policies they have in place, for all the good reasons, they can't really use a lot of external vendors.
Yeah.
Okay, because for example, when we, through VUX Consultancy, when we do a project, there's a lot of red tapes we have to go through in order to access banking data and so on, which is possible, but they have to be in place. And what one of the study was saying is the skill gap was the main issue, and the most successful company I think company using third-party, not vendor, but help, was getting twice as successful as companies that were doing it internally.
Yeah.
And that just shows you the skill gap.
It does, yeah. I think it was 67% of the successful deployments were a large part reliant on a partner that has external skills or technology, and only a third of the successful projects were done in-house.
Yeah, which show you it's huge. Imagine you can't use an external partner. You're kind of 50% down on your chance of rolling it out successfully, which is huge. I mean, we don't see that as much because we are the partner of those companies, so we see companies that partner with external vendor. But I can understand why some of the company might be struggling without external help. I mean, we specialized a lot in all the testing strategy, rollout, monitoring, all that aspect, because typically company have the core problematic, the working with the LLM vendor and so on, the data privacy in hand, because that's kind of fundamental. But we see just to bounce back to what Sandra was saying, we see a lot of people that, you talk to them about testing and their best strategies, we are rolling it out internally, to people that have a day job and they're going to test it for 5 minutes. This is not a solution. And that's why one of our, most successful, product through the consultancy is this, turnkey testing, when we come and we help people to put an automation testing strategy in place. So we come, we set up all the testing for them, we automate it and so on, and then they have that in control, and then they have the outcomes, and they can run it again and again and again. Yesterday, the team was finishing a testing, and it was just for an authentication process using LLM. And that generated 250 pages of text.
Which would take you days.
Which imagine you said to your internal team, can you test it? They're all going to test it the same way.
Yeah.
The positive path. A couple of people will use, but actually, there's 250 pages of it. So it just shows the difficulty that those team has. And if you can't outsource a part of it, or if you can't use specialized people for a very, very specialized skill sets that you don't have, and you might not need to have it straight away, Over time, you will as an enterprise, but it might be why some of the success are, just give that to the guys. They do it. One less things to worry about. We can focus on the core problem.
Yeah. And I think even those that are, I don't know specifically about that MIT study, but even those projects that are deemed successful, I don't want to put a dampener on the whole situation, but even those that are deemed successful, when you actually have a look at them, they're not that good. This is my purist, conversational AI, pure play, high expectations hat on. But there's a number of instances where in that 5% of successful projects, you could put DPD in there because they got to production. You could put Klarna in there because they got to production. You could put all of these other companies in there because they got to production. But then you test their AI agents and their chatbots, and they're not that great. And testing is a huge part of it. And part of that is that, at least what I see, is that sometimes you'll have an experience. I won't name names. It's an insurance company in the US. I tested their chatbot fairly recently. The experience is great. The conversation is really natural and fluid. It kind of gets what you're saying. But when you inspect the actual answer, it doesn't actually answer your question. So the great example is, can I add my grandma to my car insurance policy? And the answer you get back is something like, it's possible that you might be able to add your grandma to your policy if all of this criteria is matched and this one isn't. And the answer is about 6 miles long. And it's like, well, I don't really know which criteria is actually important. You haven't told me yes or no. You've just given me this vague, ambiguous answer. And if you go back to the sort of conversation design principles, the classic is Grice's maxims. And one of those maxims is to not be ambiguous. But the problem, especially with retrieval augmented generation, where it's not grounded in some conscious design, is that a lot of responses are really ambiguous. And you might test that internally. You give it to one of your staff and say, test that, ask about your grandma. And they'll read it and say, yeah, it's give me the answer. But if you're a user and you actually want to add your grandma to the policy, it doesn't actually answer your question.
Depends. And this is going to go into the conversation. Where do you use NLU?
Yeah.
And where do you use LLMs? And there's certain areas, especially in banking. Let's take banking, to continue from your example. It's great to have an LLM answer a question around mortgage options. I'm 37, I've got a single income, I want to buy a house in the next 2 years. This is my deposit that I have. What are my mortgage options? That's great because it will give you, in a conversational way that you can understand, especially on a sensitive subject, it will give you in a way that you can understand. It will give you some sort of answer, and then you make a decision from there. But if you want to check your balance, I wouldn't expect an LLM to go and check my balance. I would expect it to have an API attached to it and a rule that will go and check that for me. From a user perspective, from a business perspective, from a cost perspective to the business, I would expect the same thing. Because I don't want to be generating an answer all the time, all that tokenization and all that. Do I need that? No, it's deterministic. I need NLU. So it depends how ambiguous you want to be with it, or what kind of, like you said, what kind of creative license do we have that might make that decision. Are we going into the hybrid mode?
Yeah. Maybe the devil's advocate position there, though, is that, well, what about if we use an LLM with tool calling and we use that to retrieve your balance and do it that way?
I mean, absolutely, absolutely, you can, and there are MCP technology nowadays, and there's a million things about it, and to be honest, balance would not worry me too much. For example, to me, it's more, if you take the fundamental of those two technology, and I will come back on the hybrid after, because I have a big beef with hybrid, but chip on my shoulder, I think. But, if you go back to the fundamental, NLP classifier type technology, they were very, very difficult to work in order for them to understand the client or the user of the chatbot. But once it does, and when it does, you could completely control the answer, the tone, the dialogues, everything was in control. And if you take LLM now out of the box, it works. It understands everything. It's amazing, the level of granularity in which it understands. But you are not controlling at all your answer. And if you think a little bit wider, so some of the good stuff is, NLP, are you open on Tuesday at 9 o'clock, Mr. Bank? And it will say, oh, my opening hours are X, Y, Z, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, da, da, da. The LLM will say yes. And that is beautiful in terms of flow.
Yeah.
On that deterministic aspect, I guess, to your mortgage examples, yes, it will take my conditions, it will give me a very, very specific answer to my conditions, but I will not trust the rate it gave me. Because Bank of England have changed, or the US, for our US people watching, have changed the rate 2 days ago. And, the LLM has been trained on yesterday's or 2 days ago's rate, and on today's rate, which one is it going to come out? I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea, and I will not trust that, and that is one of the problem of LLM is at one point, is it going to make up an answer? I was talking to my son yesterday, funny enough, and we're having a lot of chat around. He's 17, he started to drink Monster and all those drinks, and I'm not making any advertisement about it, but and I said, be careful, don't drink them too late, you're not going to sleep, and all the dad stuff, I'm boring like that.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, but when you let me drink Fanta. And I said, oh, Fanta has no caffeine into it, Fanta Zero. And he said, oh, no, I Googled it. And, the answer at the top that is auto-generated said it has. And it did. I saw it.
Yeah.
And actually, it doesn't have caffeine.
Yeah.
It doesn't have caffeine. So it's again, it's difficult to trust those systems. So as a brand, as an enterprise, I can understand some of the difficulty here. Now, for the counter side of the argument, it's interesting because I know you have reviewed log from human agent. I know you have, and I have, and between us, we have reviewed a lot. They're not all very good.
No.
But that's okay for the brand. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. They live with it, but they won't live with that technology being slightly off. And if we were going to look at the ratio of when it's off with that technology and when it's not off with human, in terms of, the human might not have gone through all the guardrails that the policy of the company has, or so on, or might just have answered the wrong things. What would be those percentages? I would be very, very interesting to look into that.
Yeah.
But company acceptance of the technology being wrong, it's a lot lower than human being wrong.
It's strange, that, isn't it? I mean, for the record, I agree that for that mortgage use case, I would probably use NLU. I just wanted to play the devil's advocate because I know that's what people will be thinking. But I think the best hallucination rate, again, this is all benchmark data, so it's, not necessarily real world applicable necessarily. But I think the Gemini Flash model is like 1.3% or something like that. So in that mortgage use case, you're a large bank, millions of customers, tens of thousands of conversations about mortgages, 1.3% by going by the seemingly one of the best models out there, 1.3% of the time you're probably not going to get the right answer. And I think probably for a big bank, that's where you got to ask a question like, are we happy with that or not? I think definitely with the human agents, I'm the same sort of thing. Like back when, LLMs were first becoming very prominent in 2022 and 2021 and stuff like that. Back in 2021, I remember they were just called transformer models. But at that point, it was kind of like this debate was kind of going on all the time, which was like agents get it wrong, the LLM gets it wrong, therefore it's just a feature of the model. We've got to put up with it. But it's a very interesting concept, which is that because it's software and most software behaves predictably, companies expect that it should behave predictably. but that's not the nature of the technology. I think that's where the sort of tension is that they want it to be great and do all the flashy stuff, but also be bang on all the time, guaranteed. And you can't necessarily have the best of both worlds.
Because it goes back to testing. When you deploy software, you have tested it, you know what's going to come out to some extent. Yeah, you're always going to have bugs or things like that in production. So with that mindset, we're expecting this, I know what it's going to do. So I'm expecting it to be better than a human because a human reviewed it.
Yeah.
A human tested it. A human knows what the output is.
But the part of the not knowing what it's going to do is part of the creativity. So, for example, in the let's say that insurance example of asking to put my grandma on the insurance policy, the answer that I got back was you might be able to put your grandma on your insurance policy. So it knew I was talking about my grandma, and it knew the context of my conversation. So you've got to give it some creative license in order for it to be able to be as engaging as that. But I suppose it's like same sort of thing. If you have to give it some creativity, and you also have to give it some creativity, even in that kind of like in the agentic fashion, which I have a bit of a gripe with the terminology. But if you look at the way in which
we all know,
if you look at the way in which most of these enterprise AI platforms are constructed, they're constructed in a way whereby you have your system prompt. This is your job. This is what you're there to do. This is high level, the process that you're there to follow. You've got your tool provision. These are the tools that you should use. This is what data needs to go into this tool. This is the order in which you should use the tools, etc. And within that space, you've kind of got the freedom to follow the job goal, aim to get the goal, broadly speaking, follow the process and use the tools to achieve the outcome. So you've kind of got all the rules that you need to exist in order to make that happen. But then the magic, if you like, is in the dialogue management part, which is you don't really know exactly how it's going to go about doing it because conversations are very fluid, very dynamic, thousands of different conversational pathways that could happen in one simple conversation, which is why NLU conversation design was challenging. So it's kind of like, you need to have the creativity for it to be able to do that kind of stuff, for it to be able to get through a conversation instinctively. But at the same time, when you give it that creativity, that's where you, I suppose, have to live with the fact that it might not necessarily get everything bang on every single time, which again goes back to the testing question, because if you're monitoring it properly, you're testing it properly, at least then you know the kind of things that it's going to get wrong. What's happening at the moment, I think, is that there's many things going to production or stalling in pilot, according to the data. But the things that do make it to production, I don't really think that the companies that have put it out there actually know what's going wrong. Like they don't know that grandma question has an ambiguous answer because they're not testing. Does that make sense?
Because I think Sandra mentioned it earlier. It's all about objective testing. Your objective was to know if you could or could not put your grandma onto that policy. Did you? Is that answer gave you that certainty or not? And that's where objective, testing is really interesting in LLM because you have a lot of technical testing. You have things like RAGAS and tools like that developers are using to try to, fine-tune the different parameters of your RAG solution or why not or whatnot. But ultimately, what about the business testing? As a leader, if I was a leader of a chatbot, what am I interested into? Does it solve my user problems? That's all I care. The how, the percentage confidence and so on. I don't mind so much. And I think there start to be some kind of framework around testing on the technical levels. How much you're going to vectorize and and all these kind of parameters. But in terms of how, as a leader of that chatbot, do I know that for a certain number of item or scope, it will answer correctly if I'm challenging it across multiple questions on that subject. Is it really answering my user And I think one day we had a discussion. You had a really good examples. Like if I said to you, your retail chatbot, and I said, "What's your delivery time?" Isn't it?
Yeah. So what's your delivery time? And the policy says 3 to 5 days. So today, your chatbot is answering 3 to 5 days.
It's correct, isn't it?
It's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, it's answering 5 days. It's still factually correct. Your objective has been reached. But do we not need consistency? Would a customer be put off that you're not offering 3 to 5, but you're offering 5?
Or what about if it says 3 and it's arrived in 4?
Yeah.
Still factually correct, or at least partly correct. And that's why, when you look into the business perspective of it, does it answer the questions? Yes, it does. Is it factually complete? All right, correct, of course, very, very important, but all raga stuff, take care of that. But complete, and that's, the type of things we focus a lot through our own services. It's really looking into those aspects. Did it say between 3 to 5? No, it didn't.
I think this is where, so for me, one of the gaps that I'm seeing at the moment is that, this was the same case. I remember having this exact discussion in the NLU days, where I tested, and I'll call it out. It was the Virgin Trains Alexa skill.
Don't call it.
Right? I'm going to call it out. I did this before.
Do you want to call it out the new one now?
No, I'm testing the new one, so I don't know. But I don't think this one exists anymore. So, but I remember doing this. I called out the Domino's Alexa skill at one point, and I was slating. It turns out the person that built it was in the audience, so I got it in the neck after that. But this Virgin Trains Alexa skill did 2 things. It found you train times, and it actually allowed you to book tickets, so you could pay for it over Alexa. So capability-wise, brilliant. Experience-wise, left a bit to be desired, because it had 2 pathways. In the NLU sort of world, you've got to craft the paths and so. So it had 2 pathways. If you go down the pathway that is to find a train time, and you arrive at a train time, so I want to go from London to Reading, and I found the train time, I found the train. If you say book the ticket, can't do it, get stuck. You've got to start the whole thing again and ask it that you want to book a ticket, and then go and find the train time in the ticket booking journey, and then you can book the ticket. And that was because it was, at least this is the approach, the perspective I had at the time, which was that that had been approached from a technical perspective. Can we technically answer train times, and can we technically do bookings? Yes, we can. It wasn't created from the perspective of, well, what's the experience going to be like? Well, first people are going to want to find train times, and then if it's right, they're going to want to book. So there was none of that experience design part of it. And I feel as though we're kind of there with LLMs. We're in a place where a lot of the teams that are building this stuff in those internal examples of the third of the use cases that were successful being done internally, those internal teams are largely built up of technical skill sets, which you absolutely have to have, and probably more than creative, absolutely. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that without the design input, you don't necessarily know that question should always say from 3 to 5 days. Nobody's necessarily specifying that this answer always has to say this. And after this answer's come, the user might actually at that point say, well, I'm interested in something. Because if now the delivery timescales are hospitable to my preferences, if I'm okay with that, maybe I've got a product in mind. So as a designer, you would say, well, at this point, maybe we'll want to start offering or asking, have you got a product in mind? And start to craft that experience to be able to help the user get their job done. But that seems missing, because what we're doing, and what most businesses are doing, is they're thinking, right, we need RAG. So we just need to answer that question. So let's just answer the question. Is the question accurate? Yes, it is. Great. We're done. But the experience from a user journey perspective, it's almost like, because we've got LLMs, they'll solve the problem. Throw everything to LLM and that'll handle it. So my observation is that there's a complete absence of any design thinking going into most of these applications today, which is why you get that grandma question, you get that inconsistency. Yes, it's 100% related to a lack of testing, But the reason why it's not necessarily the reason, but one of the reasons why it might not be being tested is because nobody's thought about the fact that that's a requirement.
But yeah.
Yeah, and we have seen it from interviewing vendors, and we talk to the vendors in the industry, and we have seen it from some of them that have said there's less and less conversational design flow charts being done at the moment, because we are putting everything in a prompt.
Yeah.
So there's less and less looking at those paths, how this journey should be solved, which I think, it's just my personal view, I think it's a mistake. I think you should still have that. You should still have that source of truth documentation for you internally to know what's supposed to happen. Because if a client or user is asking for a refund, you still need to go through that journey and say, they're asking for a refund, look at the order date, look at the order number, look at the product, look at the policy. I need to draw all that information before I tell the client that, yes, we can do a refund or not. If I can do a refund, they will get upset. How do I escalate that? Do I escalate that to an agent? At what point do I escalate that to an agent? What is the process to escalate to the agent? What information or summary do I need to give to the agent? So it's still a path that you need to follow. And I think conversational designers still need to be brought in that alongside the technical people.
Yeah.
And alongside what they're doing to say, actually, from an experience point of view, this is how it should look like. And yes, we give it a creative license, and we say, well, actually, I don't need to know order number first, and I can, draw that later on from my database. It doesn't really matter the order, but the outcome and the journey should be like this.
Yeah.
And I think they should be brought in.
But do you think it's a skill gap issue? Do you think it's a skill gap because maybe conversational designers do not really understand the how to deliver an experience like that using that technology that is a little bit less predictable? And that means they are being taken out of the team, because I completely agree with you. Right now, it's a technical subject.
Yeah.
It's you look at the team of some of the clients we do consultancy for, and it's just like very, very, very clever, very technical people. But where are the business? Where are the conversational designer? They are not there.
No, a lot of them are very much frozen out of the. I mean, that's the story of a designer, really. And go back to the beginning of the internet, very technical proficiency. Designers got brought in as the internet matured. Go back to the beginning of mobile apps, very technically led. Designers got brought in when that started to mature. Same thing with NLU.
So just do we have to wait?
Maybe we have to wait.
We just have to wait. But it's a shame we always repeat the same. Look at NLU. I mean, we still see models like that have been built where the intent are trained with, 200 utterances, and you look at those utterances and say, no human have looked at it.
Yeah,
someone has tried to be clever. And say, oh, surely I can look at the log and, use even LLM to classify them and throw that to the NLU, and it never works, And I feel like we are repeating that same patterns all over again. We've seen, again, we're not going to throw anybody under the bus here, but we've seen clients just building it and throwing it out. And those clients have large amount of customer. And it's okay because the brand is young and cool and quite well suited to that technology. But having testing it, it desires a little bit more work.
Yeah. And if you're not going to do any kind of design work, any diligent design work, how do you even know what you're supposed to test? If you and I think that the benefits of the LLMs 100% is that there was a study, I've got it here, which is it was called something like LLMs Pass the Turing Test or something like that. It was a study that was done fairly recently, and essentially what it found was that LLMs now can convince, when you prompt GPT-4 with a personality, you can say, embody this personality, right? And then you create this Turing test example. It convinces over 80% of people that interact with it that it's a human. Don't give it the personality and use GPT-3 in it, and most people find out that it predict that it's not human. But the takeaway from that is that LLMs are genuinely fantastic at sounding great, right? And the problem with the NLU days was that you had to do so much painstaking work to understand what was said, so much painstaking work to craft responses. Whereas now LLMs are brilliant at understanding and they're very good at sounding natural. But the problem is that so now you don't need to do the diligent design, as in like turn by turn crafting and fallback design, all that kind of stuff's taken care of. But you at least, for me at least, have to define the process. What are we doing here? Returns. Okay, how do returns work? Where does it start? Then what happens? Then what happens? What system does that use? What data do we need? You've got to design what the process looks. Because if in doing that, you'll think, well, why do we take that reference number and ping that system and then put it here and do that? Why don't we just do this bit? You can understand how to remove waste to make the process better if you concentrate on that. But then secondly is that when you put your customer experience lens on, you'll catch stuff like this. Like if someone asks about my grandma, then we don't just want to give them an answer. We have to use progressive disclosure here because there's some criteria that need to be answered to give the user an actual answer. So if they ask about the grandma, we've got to then ask, well, are they this? Are they in the same house as you? Have they got a driving license? And then we give them the answer. So you've got to do some design, because then you've got a test case there. We want to test about people wanting to add specific individuals onto their policy, and this is what it should look like. Now let's run some tests against that. So for me, it's a huge gap. Both of those areas that we've covered so far, design and testing, are two massive gaps at the minute.
I mean, we know it because that's the way we have done it through the project we are working on, you know, and it's working and it's showing where it's not working as well, very, very well. So I think it's key, and I think, you know, it's the big question is why? Why are those big brands, those big enterprises, why are they not doing it? And that's, you know, we get quite a few of them that contact us and we work with them and they know they need help. But the vast majority is still saying not. And I think it's all this kind of narrative that, you know, LLM or working with AI, or you need to learn AI nowadays and so on because you have less effort to do. And I think that is starting to get embedded into, you know, all these teams and organizations and, you know, thinking LLM will be simpler to do. LLM will be less work. And, you know, we talk to clients that, you know, put LLM out there and said, have you looked at any logs? No. Okay, cool. So when you have an agent that you just train, a live agent that you just train, you never review, you know, you don't have a manager that review what he's saying. Oh, no, we do. We do. Okay, but not an AI agent. Okay. So it's all those things that the LLM provider have been terrible, but the NLP provider at the time has been terrible. I remember, I'm not going to name a brand, but that used to say, years and years ago, used to say, oh, you know, building a chatbot, it's easy. You put a bit of data, we put a bit of AI pointer magic, and you will see, you know, it's great. And we realized over time it was a lot of work. And I think, you know, some of the most advanced deployment and some of the ones that start to be successful are the ones that start to realize it's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah.
As much as it's understand very well, that's just a tiny part of the implementation requirement.
I think also the areas where the successful deployments, especially for the large enterprises, they're coming in very narrowly scoped areas, you know? So it's kind of like, you know, we did a meetup with NatWest back end of last year. They were sharing one of their use cases, which was brilliant, which is that they've got in their mortgage and credit cards journey, the NLU works reasonably well. But like every NLU, it doesn't classify every single time. And so what they used to do is they used to throw this disambiguation menu up when it if the classification fell in a degree of certain tolerance. And it would say, I think you might be talking about one of these three things. Am I on the right lines? And it was marginally effective as those things are, but if you're hitting the long tail, then you've got no chance. So what they did is they replaced that with, at the time, it was an explicit opt-in to the user. So we're trialing generative AI. Do you want to see if we can answer that question for you instead? And if you select yes, it will then run a retrieval augmented generation pipeline, answer that question. And it began with a 30% accuracy, and in the end, they got it up to something like 80-odd% accuracy. 80
Usually it's 95. Everybody's using 95.
Well, it was actually that 80-odd% of requests found an answer.
Okay.
And of those, 99% apparently were factually accurate.
Okay, I'm not.
So whatever it was. Okay. But what I'm saying there is that this is a very specific use case. It's in very specific journeys, and it's coming at a very specific point in that journey. And it's been done diligently. It's took a long time to first build it, test it, get it into a beta environment, and they're reviewing everything, every single conversation. There's other examples. I don't know if we can name the name, but another bank who's got classification running, and that's the same sort of thing. If the NLU doesn't classify it, it gives it to the LLM. The LLM will try and classify it. And then what they have there is an explicit confirmation, which says, sounds like you're talking about credit card loans. Is that right? And when the user opts in and says, yes, that's right, it then takes that signal to then say, we got the classification right. So that's another example of a very small use case, not small in their case, because they're doing hundreds of thousands of conversations a week, but small in capability-wise, it's just doing classification. It's not doing anything else. Ascent utilities provider in the Netherlands have got a great use case where, same thing, disambiguation. The NLU doesn't understand it. Rather than coming up with the menu to say, is it one of these things, it throws the context of the conversation to an LLM, and it says, I need you to ask a question to the user that's going to help us elaborate on what they need. And so if someone says, my lights aren't working, they take that, they throw it to the LLM, they say, this is the situation, what could be a good follow-up question? And then the LLM comes back and say, your lights aren't working, could be a power cut. Is it a power cut? And they might say yes, and then we take that, create an utterance for an NLU, send it to the NLU, and then, the classification goes up. So it seems as though, especially at the big enterprise level, obviously they can't just overhaul their NLU overnight, but they're experimenting with very specific areas, very specific capabilities that seem to be doing, reasonably well.
Hybrid. This is where we're going, right? Hybrid.
Well, you don't care. You don't seem to be that bothered about hybrid. What's your perspectives on that?
It's just because hybrid is a way to hide for companies that can't implement it properly because they do not want to put the effort into it. I am genuinely believing there is a way to get a great LLM out. Scope might be narrow, given, but using the right technique, the right effort, and the right expectations, I think definitely the technology could be absolutely awesome.
There's a great use case.
But what they're doing right now is just like, okay, I'm gonna do this tiny bit, and if it's wrong, why are you not testing it? You could discover it. Don't wait for your user to experience it, to discover it. You know what I mean? Yes, it's all lovely to review logs, and I am a big believer of reviewing log, but that should be your third level testing. You should have done the first and the second one before, you know what I mean? And I think it's just like, it just how do you budget those projects, and where do you put that budget? And I think there is a lack of knowledge around that. And I think, it can be easily realigned. There is a lack of tooling. It's a given. There is a lack of tooling. There is a few company, Composo.ai and Coval.dev and so on, testing solution that start to come out there. They get funding and so on. So that's quite great. But it's not known from people. And that's a little bit where those, where those blueprints are missing.
But you are more of an advocate of hybrid, am I understanding that?
Yes, right? I am very much so. Purely because you're both saying, they're starting with a really small scope, And, let's narrow it down and let's just see if this one works. And I agree with that because we've seen other people in the industry, they're coming out with agentic and LLMs and Gen AI use cases. And you ask them, so how many intents do you have? 800. And it's like, why? Why do you have 800? When have we ever needed 800 intents? Is the scope of your business so wide that we need to answer most of those? We even know from the NLU world, we had a client with 350 intents, 80% of the traffic was going to the top 10 intents. Top 10. They didn't even need the rest of them. It was just, but you have to do that analysis. So we're talking about blueprints. We're talking about that. Do I need to go to this extent with so many intents or so many subjects or topics or however we want to call them? First step is not even in the NLU world, not even in the Gen AI world, intent map. People are not doing their intent map. And is the difference between what is the customer saying, but what does the customer actually want?
Exactly.
The customer is saying, I lost my credit card. That's not an intent. What do they want? They want a replacement. They want to block the account. They want to block future transactions. They want to speak to an agent. Those are intents. You have to map them. You have to map what your world is. You have to map what your chatbot is going to talk about. And then based off of that, we had an exercise recently with a client. Okay, we're doing this. We got all the intents. How are these being treated by the technology? Is it NLP? Is it Gen AI? Is it going to go through the voice channel? Is it actually, I have a great journey on the website. I don't need to have it in there. Let's triage it and let's send it over there. Like, how do we treat all of these? Not everything needs to be slotted in your chatbot. Now, just because we can't do it and you think it's great. Think about it, 710. Test that.
That is
but it's one of your beef, I believe. From that intent first phase, which we do with clients, then after you can start about your dialogues, how do you want that to be experienced? And where the biggest flaw is, and I know that's one that get you started. It's how do you use it to cross sell?
Yeah.
How do you use that point to cross sell? None of the RAG are cross selling; they're just on sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The great example of that is the example I use all the time. This is from a real telco chatbot. Again, I won't throw them under the bus, but you ask a question.
Are you gonna put the name on the subtitles?
Under the bottom, the lower thirds. So you ask a question. How do I upgrade my contract? Ask any telco chatbot this question. How do I upgrade my contract? If they're using retrieval augmented generation, they will answer that question with an answer, and they'll end that answer in a full stop. And I call it the full stop problem, which is, how do I upgrade my contract? Oh, it's easy. Oh, great. Sounds good. It's easy. All you've got to do is pay off your current contract, find a new phone, and take out a new contract. Full stop. Brilliant. So how do I pay off my contract?
What a missed opportunity.
That doesn't help me at all. So it goes back again to that concept of properly designing what the experience. If someone asks about contract renewals, then this is the answer that we want to be giving them, or something like this. But we've then got to get them into the contract renewal journey. How do we do that? Well, we ask them, do you want me to see how long you've got left on your current contract? Or have you found a new phone that you like? Or take the conversation forward, And to do that, you've got to end that response with a question mark. A chatbot should always lead it should always invite the next turn. Principally, it should always encourage you to respond to it.
And if you look at the latest release of ChatGPT, it does do a lot more of that.
It does, yeah.
A lot more of that, but not so much into what we see in terms of chatbot.
Yeah, it does quite good, which is that. And sometimes I didn't used to actually read what ChatGPT ends with, because normally I'm in the process, I know what I want to do. But recently I have been doing that, and sometimes it comes up with an idea that you hadn't thought about yet.
Yeah.
Or do you want me to take this and turn it into a matrix?
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I never thought about that. Yeah, turn it. Yeah, let's shoot.
But probably they've spent a lot more money thinking about it than some of the enterprise are right now.
But principally, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
You've just done this, so what's related? Now, at the moment, there's no real way of avoiding the process of having some degree of manually mapping your journey or your process and figuring out yourself, well, how do we kind of thread this together? There's lots of journey mapping tools out there. There's lots of like process mining tools out there that are becoming quite popular. I think there'll potentially be some future state where you take that data that you have, your journey data, your call transcripts and all that kind of stuff, and rather than you diligently designing it, the AI will have that data and know, at this point in time, I'm better off asking about if they want to renew their contract, or I'm better off seeing if they want to, you know what I'm saying, start to make those decisions on its own. I can see that happening. But at the moment, I don't think we're close to a business, one, being capable of doing that, and two, putting that out there in the wild when they can't even answer, questions with unambiguous responses. Going back to the question about the good examples, there is some good examples out there. The Poly AI are pretty good on the voice channel. They've, Landry's Hotel and Casinos have got a pretty good use case. I think they're doing Metro Bank in the UK. I actually called Metro Bank because I have an account with Metro Bank, and I wanted to transfer some money to a freelancer in Canada, and I called up because there's no way of doing it in the app, and I was going to use a third party, and I want to see if I can do it properly first. So I called up, and this voice assistant greeted me and stuff like that. And I can't remember exactly what I said, but I said something along the lines of, I'm trying to transfer some money to Canada. I can't see the option in the app, and I don't know if it's even possible and if there's a charge or something like that, some long-winded way. And I thought, I kind of did that on purpose. There's no way that's going to understand what I'm saying. And it said, so you're trying to transfer some money abroad, is that right? I was like, wow. Yes, I am actually. I couldn't believe it. And it said, okay, fine, that's not something I can help you with, but I can transfer you to the right team. And it transferred. The issue was, I spoke, so
there we go, the negative.
No, but the thing was, this was nothing to do with Poly AI. They couldn't do anything about it. It was that when they put me in the queue, the right queue for the right agent, it took me 45 minutes to speak to them.
Yeah.
So you can have all the technology on the front end you want, you've still got to be able to deal with it when it happens. But the voice experience part of it was spot on.
But look, we talked to the client we all know. We won't name, but one of our clients about voice, and we talk about different strategy and so on. And some of the narrow use case we have to do identification, which is called DPA for them. So identifications of the user calling, and we picked a couple of very, very narrow examples for their voice channel. But actually, all live agents need to do that authentication. And as we were doing it, we could actually get that as the main first touch point, do the authentications, and if the subject is not something we can do it automatically, we pass it to the agent that do not have to do that authentications. And we were asking the client, does that save time? And he said that will save a huge amount of time. And just that, something very scripted, and I know we could use NLU and so on, but I think LLM is still very much better for that, because I might not have my reference number, I might not have X, Y, Z, and NLU is very, very good at that. But just that, take a narrow use case, but actually part of that use case can be used for everything else on the 1.2 million calls they have a year. It's huge.
Yeah.
It is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The another good use case actually is Santander in Germany. I think they were using Cognigy, and basically they had, I think, something like 15 people in their insurance division whose job it was only purely to make phone calls to basically approve loans. Now, the way in which it happens, I don't know if this is a regulatory thing in Germany or whatever, but basically what happens is the end user goes onto the website, they fill in this form about whatever loan they want or whatever, press submit. What happened was this form then gets submitted to this team of 15 people, and they just start going through the inbox and start calling people. Are you still interested in that loan? You know, do you still want to talk to us about it? Their outbound calls were not being answered 50% of the time. So half of them, 7.5 people, basically spending their whole week doing nothing because the calls are not being answered whatsoever.
Yeah.
So what they did is they put in this outbound dial-in agent. The second the form is submitted, this is the other benefit, the second it's submitted, the user gets a phone call. And it's an AI agent that says, hey, Mr. Sims, you've just submitted this form. In order to approve the loan, we've got to rubber stamp it. You've got to put you through to someone. Do you want to speak to somebody now? And the user's like, yeah, great. Yeah, I'll speak to someone now. Put them straight through to someone. So now these 15 people are just answering calls with people who are ready.
Absolutely.
And if the user says, oh, no, now's not a good time, it'll say, brilliant, let me know when you're available and I'll book it in with the team. And it will just book them a call back. So now the team, rather than randomly dialing numbers, they've just got a list of people who've asked for a call back at 2 p.m. on Tuesday, and then they just.
But again, they moved from 50% of those people, not that they are not doing anything, but they were not doing anything productive, you know, to 100% of those people answering call. Because even if you go to a queue for a user perspective, okay, the 15 are taken, you know, they're already speaking to someone, and you go to a queue. Okay, maybe not the greatest experience, but on a business perspective, on a cost-based perspective, now you have 100% of your people that are doing something productive with a productive outcome.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Brilliant.
Huge.
Yeah. So where does that leave us then? You know, we've kind of spoke a lot about the some of the challenges with LLMs. We've spoke about testing being a big gap. We've spoke about how maybe organizations are not really thinking about the experiences they're creating. Maybe they're approaching it in a more of a sort of technical fashion. Like, can we make this work? We've been told by the C-suite to make it happen. We're making it happen. But then the outcome of that is that there is applications out there either that don't make it to production in the vast majority of cases, or they do make it to production and they're missing some fundamentals. You know, the responses are ambiguous. The journey doesn't really make a terrible amount of sense. They're not really sure whether or not they're achieving the outcomes they want to achieve because they've got no way of really properly monitoring or testing. That being the case, you know, we've alluded to some of the work that we've been doing in the consultancy to help organizations get over this kind of stuff. A business that's listening to this now who finds themselves in a similar situation, what do they do? I think you alluded to the start of that process in terms of the intent map, but what advice do we have for businesses that are in a situation where they're looking at generative AI, they're exploring it, they think there's value there, maybe they've got an NLU chatbot, maybe they're approaching it for the first time. What are some of the steps that they can take to make sure that they don't become part of that 90% that don't go any further than where they are now?
You look at me. I think look at your budget. That's your first. Look at your budget, because either you have a restricted budget, which a lot of people do, you know, and then after, if you have a fixed budget, reduce your scope. And, you know, I'm not for an hybrid approach, but I'm for a small scope approach. And do it right instead of do too much. You know, the point we talked about, you know, conversational design, you know, just take a narrow scope, but do it well. Just plan your upsell, plan your, you know, do your intent map and so on, so on. And then plan your proper testing. So when you release that piece, it's spot on. Okay. And then you can calculate an ROI at what it's going to cost to really do that right across the business. Because probably it's going to cost a lot more than you think. And yet, the return on investment could be huge. So is it worth doing? Yes, but do it right. Because right now we have seen it times and times again. And it's killing me when client comes and they have done it and they have made the mistake. And you remember, they came on the call and they explain, and we close the call and we say, yeah, we could have told you 6 months ago, you know, you would have saved some money, right? You know, because the approach is not right. So look at your budget, reduce your scope, but do it from top to bottom. Intent map, conversational design, cross-sell, technology, of course, you know, and testing, and release this piece and measure it, you know, so much easier when you have a narrow narrow scope, small amount of traffic, to look into that behavior. How does it behave in the wild? After 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, if is my model drifting, do I have the monitoring? I can still put human to review that before scaling it up. Okay. Then after you have a great understanding of what the budget has been spent on that, what is the return, and you can prove that return on investment in the business instead of trying to do a big splash. And what's going to happen, I can guarantee you're not going to get the ROI. People are going to ask you to justify how did you spend that money, and you have you have trouble in your hand. That would be my advice.
Any thoughts, Sandra?
We're seeing a lot of the companies that have already started and they already have these separate teams in place. I would say think about what is the point where you bring the two teams together. Because there's center of excellences or innovation team or the tech team or the Gen AI team and the agentic AI team, and they're doing this part. And then there's the NLP team, and we're going in a hybrid mode, but the two teams are not really working together. They seem to have different governance styles, policies, different testing policies, different testing frameworks. Everything is a bit different because the technology is different. But actually, I think they should start to come together. Because most of them have this hybrid approach. So if you're having a hybrid approach, your teams should be overlapping at some point. And at this point, they're not. It's very much separate. I'm still piloting this. I'm still doing this. And I understand why. It's a risk adverse team. And it's like it has its own budget and it has its own. And now I want to see, as a business leader, I want to see what our team is going to bring me before I move forward with it. But because they're highly technical, it's still missing that conversational designer piece. It's still missing that experience piece. It's still missing some of those like basic frameworks that we have. So it's kind of like look back at your existing frameworks. How do those feed into this new world? And try and bring the two teams together.
Yeah, I think that's great. So to recap, we're talking about starting with the intent map, mapping your world, figuring out what it is that you're using.
That's just best practice, regardless what you do.
That doesn't change. Then starting to define where you're better off focusing your efforts in terms of where most of your traffic is, how are you best automating those things, or do you have any alternatives, that you can triage to. Then spending a bit of time actually going through that design process of figuring out what's the best journey that this could possibly be, and is there any ancillary things that we need to consider or that we're missing. That then informs the scope and technology and what it is you're going to build, which then informs your testing strategy as you move forward, and then you're into the deployment and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a good path forward there. If you've made it to this point, thank you very much for tuning in. And if you are interested in how we can help you do these things, help you plan your strategy, help you design effective experiences, help you put a proper testing strategy together, then you can head to vux.world to find out more. And if you are interested in boosting your maturity, let's face it, every business on this planet now is interested in AI, aren't they? They're all wondering and investigating and finding out how you can make it work. We found out how 95% of businesses are not having success with this. And that's because they're not building the right capabilities. They're not solving the right problems. They're not applying themselves in the right kind of way. So to build your maturity is absolutely crucial. And you can find out how you are doing in your maturity journey if you go to vux.world/maturity. There's about 13, 14 questions, something like that. Answer them. It'll take you 10 minutes. It'll plot you on our 6-point maturity scale. It'll tell you exactly where you are, and you will get a follow-up from us with some handcrafted recommendations for free of how you can level up and start to build your maturity in your organization. So thank you for tuning in. Benoit, Sandra, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute bit of a roller coaster, but we got there in the end.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure as usual.
Nice one. And we'll see you again on the next one. Thank you so much. Bye now.